From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas of Stunning Digital Marketing. In this podcast, I sit down with Anne McCarthy of Automattic, and we talk about a couple things. The first being the Block Museum, and the second being the roadmap to WordPress 6.0. It is coming. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this delightful conversation I had with Anne. This episode of the SDM Show was sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. Today I've got a special guest with me. I have Anne McCarthy of Automattic. How are you today, Anne?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great and excited to be here.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you. I was saying to you before the pre-show, and Nathan Wrigley was kind of saying, you've kind of been everywhere lately. And there's a little bit of truth to that. You've been a busy lady the last 6 months. So.
Oh, yeah. No, there's a lot going on. I just feel like very lucky to be able to talk with so many different people and get invited to so many different things to talk about what's happening, because I know so many people in the WordPress community care so much. So it's just really an honor to be able to talk about the cutting edge things that are coming.
Yeah, it's funny because we have an amazing community. And I say that quite a bit when I talk to people. And people say, what makes working in WordPress different? And I always come back to the community.
Mm-hmm. Same. I could not agree more. Even this week, I've had multiple different people in multiple different ways really step up with running the release party, with helping put together a social learning space for the full setting outreach program, the Block Museum, which we'll talk about. Like, there's so many different examples I have of just the community repeatedly showing up in a really tough time for the world, which is very cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. And as you know, I co-manage a LinkedIn group with Courtney Robertson. And, even the people in that group are stepping up. And it's just an amazing place to be. So I think we're all grateful for that. So,
yeah, I definitely pinch myself most days.
Yeah. So I have to ask you a question I like to ask a lot of people, especially people at Automattic. How did you get into WordPress, and kind of what's your origin story?
I love this question. I was actually messaging with the guy who was responsible for all of it. His name's Jeff. I was a student at UNC Chapel Hill. It was my freshman year. I needed a work study job because school is expensive in the US. And there was a job that came through for an instructional technologist position. And it was basically, helping write documentation, helping teach professors and students how to use this tool called WordPress. And I was a psychology major. I had no experience, but I had been using Blogger for about probably 6 or 7 years at that point. A friend of mine and I set up private Blogger accounts so that we could talk to each other.
Yeah.
And so I was familiar with blogging. I, light understanding of HTML. And I applied for this job. I met up with this guy named Jeff. It was one of maybe the 3 times I ever met with him. And he hired me. And he basically took a huge chance on me because he should have hired probably someone in the computer science department. And he taught me everything. And I kind of grew from that job to leading a team of students, to working directly for the university in their web services department. And then eventually found out that UNC was a VIP client of Automattic. And so a group of my coworkers went on a VIP meetup and they're like, Automattic is so cool. You should apply there. You should work there. And they were so supportive despite wanting me to stay at the university. My manager actually said, he's like, I really want you to stay, but also this seems like a really unique chance for you to spread your wings. And they supported me through my trial. And that's how I landed at Automattic, was basically the combination of that team going on a VIP meetup and having a blast. And then someone gave me the book, A Year Without Pants, because I was working remotely and as a student, which was very unusual. And so she was like, you work remotely, you might like this book. And so it was kind of a weird convergence where it was like all signs were pointing to WordPress and the open source space. And I never looked back.
Yeah, I what I would say is we're really lucky as a community to have you up at Automattic, because you're always in tune with what the community's doing. You care about what the community's doing, and frankly, I think you're really approachable, and people will post stuff or ask you questions, and you've always got time for people. So I think the community is lucky to have you on.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. And to me, I'm just paying it forward. Like my origin story is someone teaching me. So to me, it's just all from there on. I feel like I'm still catching up on how much other people have taught me. So I appreciate that.
Have you ever thought that we'd get to 43% of the internet? Like, isn't that incredible?
Gosh, no. What's funny is I have a memory of 2 weeks into Automattic. I was at WordCamp San Francisco in 2014. And I remember we were at like 23%, I think. Mm-hmm. And I brought up, I was like, we should market WordPress. Because I was 21 at the time. And so none of my friends really knew what WordPress was. It wasn't big on the scene. I was living in San Francisco and I'd say I worked for Automattic. No one knew Automattic. No one, some people knew WordPress, some people didn't. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, if we want open source to win and be the default pathway, we need to start doing some sort of marketing, or rather than just relying on word of mouth. And there was zero interest at the time. It was kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like we're probably not going to do that. So in my mind, I thought we would slowly grow. Mm-hmm. But 43% is really, really wild. I feel like it's almost like I wasn't paying attention to the numbers, and it all of a sudden sprouted up. And then as I've been more involved directly in a role that's facing the community and involved with the community rather than internal to Automattic the last couple of years, the responsibility of that and the weight of that is very serious. I've been reading more books around ethics and technology and, how do we move ethically and sustainably forward when you are influencing that much of the internet. It keeps me up at night. Let's put it that way.
I think it keeps a lot of us up. But I think, it's interesting because I was having a conversation with somebody who does websites yesterday. And he said to me, good friend who's a trainer, and he trains WordPress, and said, this company wants a site done in Shopify. And I said to him, why? Oh, well, it starts cheap. And I said, really? So have you bothered? Has anybody looked into, by the time you throw all the add-ins in, what it's going to cost you? So you're either going to pay monthly or you're going to pay up front. And I said to him, why aren't you looking at WooCommerce and Outright? And I said, why aren't you looking at a host like a GoDaddy or a Newfold that's got managed hosting where they build plugins into the hosting? And we're now starting to see some of that. And he said, I never thought of it that way. And I said, well, that's what I'd be doing, because the beauty of the open source world is you can change the code. You can do stuff. You have control over where you put it. You have control over your backups. You have control over a lot of things. And if you go to one of these closed platforms, you're kind of pigeoned in.
Yeah. And I think people don't, I describe it to friends as, what if your Instagram account was shut down? Like I have friends who think, oh, I just need Instagram, or I just need TikTok, or I'm like, okay, but what happens if all of a sudden you're violating the terms of service for whatever reason? Or they just decide to shut you down. You have to think about the long-term longevity of the platform and like what can actually grow with you. And where you actually can have control. And it's something that, I think this ties into people becoming a bit more savvy around privacy. And to me, the more I talk to friends, give me like 5 minutes with someone, it's like, and you explain it to them and all of a sudden something clicks. And I still think that's a huge challenge that we have, is explaining why open source is a better way. Even if it might be, and this is something that I think is really funny, is you're not going to have necessarily those magic moments where, you're walking up to the airport and your phone pulls up on your wallet the boarding ticket, because we're not tracking you in that way. And that's one of the things I try and explain is I was like, those creepy moments where you're like, is my phone listening to me? Which it doesn't need to, because that's how good ad tracking is. that's not going to happen with WordPress. And that's actually can be seen as a benefit. And it might be a little bit harder in some ways right now. And I think a lot of us are working very, very hard to ensure it gets easier and easier so that, open source becomes the easier way than even proprietary private software is. But we do need to kind of explain that, I think, to folks, because we are getting inundated with these, what I'll call, magical, sneaky moments with tech. And I'm curious what like the open source version of that looks like too.
Yeah, it's so true. Like there's a lot of tech going on, problems with privacy right now. We've got issues on Facebook. People are getting more ticked off with the platform, me included, by the way. I've had an ongoing issue where I can't post anything from my agency domain on Facebook for 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
And I haven't done anything. So, Instagram for me is a bit of a cesspool, to say the least. So I just kind of avoid it like the plague. And, we've all got those concerns. And then you throw in laws in California, laws in Canada, which are pretty stringent, GDPR in Europe. It's a tough place to be right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah. No, it really is. And I think there might be a return towards, I don't know, like between like Substack and what's going on with Substack and different newsletter platforms. Yep. That's like another area that I'd love to see WordPress continue to champion. But yeah, it's a very tough time to figure out where to host your stuff, how to find others. I think that's the magical piece that a lot of these social media accounts have, is the amplification and connection with others, where spinning up your own site, it's a bit harder to start building your audience without those social media platforms. So it's like, what can we do without them? I don't know. It's a very interesting problem to kind of solve.
It is. And you mentioned spinning up your own site. That's the cool thing with WordPress. It used to be, and you and I have both been around long enough, where you actually had to do the famous 5-minute install and just kind of spin up, move the files around and do all of that. And now most websites in cPanel, you go to and you push a button and there's your install and you're done. That's pretty empowering when you think about it.
100%. It's funny though, because if I'm with a friend who doesn't know anything about websites, it's the most intimidating thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's almost like we need to have like a party celebration animation that happens when you do that. So it like lightens the experience, because I do think we're just getting more and more spoiled with other types of tech, providing these slick things that, spinning up a WordPress site to me is still magical, but, especially compared to the 5-minute install, but compared to other platforms, there's a lot there. I also think, quite frankly, the other part that I'm very excited about in the future is engagement isn't everything. Like if I had 5 friends who really just like read my blog and super engaged with it, I'd be thrilled. And if they had their own blogs and I could read their stuff, like that's what I want. I want in-depth connection. I'm not, engagement at all costs or amplification at all costs. And I think we might see a return to that, where it's, I remember for a while on Facebook, it was so cool if you had, over 1,000 friends. And it's like, wait, I don't even know that many people. Like I deactivate my Facebook account. It's permanently deactivated basically. And from time to time, I'll log back in just to check like friends' birthdays or, there's a couple people I still respond to on there, pull photos. And every time I log in, I'm like, who are these people? It's like I played soccer growing up and I probably played with that person in a tournament at some point, or like met them at a hotel, but like I don't recognize most of the people on there. And it's such a strange time capsule of my life and like a way of approaching the internet, and it's just frozen in time. So I just shake my head every time I log back in. I'm like, wow, that was a weird time on the internet.
So true. And I think, Twitter's a lot the same way. I mean, I was looking at Twitter numbers just for fun this morning, and I'm sitting around, about 17,000 followers. And I was thinking, and how many of these people do I really talk to?
Yeah.
And there's probably a core 20 regularly and then a core 50 or 60 on top of that. You know where that conversation goes. And it's just,
Yeah.
And I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but I've been around long enough. I remember days where we used to dial in the services like CompuServe and Genie and stuff like that.
I don't know.
And
I wasn't around for that. That's
no,
interesting. Tell me more about that.
back in the days before the internet. So been there, done that
Hmm.
too. So kind of
Yeah.
understand that a little bit. Let's
Mhm.
jump into the one of the things I want to talk about was you created
Mhm.
a community block art museum. How did that come
Mhm.
about, and why did you create it?
Oh man. So I love a side project. I like to do different things. I like to push the edges of things. It's just how my brain
Hmm.
is set up. And so, there's a bunch of design tools that were coming to the WordPress experience. I was getting lots of feedback around them. I spearhead the full siting outreach program, which is all about getting feedback about full siting features.
Yep.
And we were on a hallway hangout, which is just a fun, when the pandemic started, it's like, how do we keep connected with folks in a casual way, specifically contributors to the WordPress space or even end users, like whoever really wants to join. And so I was running one of those about something totally random. And Tammy Lister, who I worked with at Automattic and now is at XWP, fantastic designer and fantastic human, she was on and she was showing off some patterns she made. She was doing like a 30-minute challenge every day for a month. She just created a different pattern and saw what she could do. And some of them, I was so inspired by what she was doing. And I just kind of was like, Tammy, this is art. Like, you are making art. Like, these are not patterns. This is art. And something clicked where as these design tools were coming up, and just like things like duotone or having control of even simple things like borders and padding and being able to layer group blocks in each other, like there were just so many options that were coming up. I was like, I wonder if we could create an art museum. Like, Tammy's doing it, but Tammy's very cutting edge. She's very creative. So I was like, I don't know how feasible it'll be for everyone to do it, but maybe there's a chance. And so I just kind of wrote the idea down as like block art museum, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I love museums too. That was one of the biggest things. It's one of the biggest things I miss right now with the state of the world, is just being able to go and browse art and walk away where you see it and you want to make your own. And
Yes.
I kind of started messaging people throughout the community, just being like, hey, if I did this, would you submit anything? So people like Rich Tabor, or Brian Gardner, Joe Simpson, I reached out to. Like, there's just a lot of folks in the community where I was like, if I did this, would you come along? Some folks were slammed. 5.9 was coming out. People were really gearing up, and this was October of last year. So part of it is like probably less than half the people I reached out to actually contributed because of how, there's just so much new coming to WordPress. And so originally I wanted it to launch with 5.9 because a lot of the tooling was coming then. But there were just people kept being like, I want to contribute, but I need more time. So I kind of pumped the brakes on it and launched it in early March. And it's just meant to be you can see a WordPress, like there's a whole, I don't know, I think of it as a joke. I've heard this a lot. It's like, you can see a WordPress site a mile away whenever you are deep in WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my favorite like party tricks with friends. Like, people will at a party in the past have been like, and WordPress site or not? And I'll scroll through it and be able to tell pretty quick. And I wanted people to look at this art and not believe it was made with the block editor. I wanted them to be surprised by it and inspired by it. And also I wanted them to kind of open up their own editor and see what they could make. Like, that was the whole intent, was, hey, these new tools are coming and like, this is the extreme edge of what you can do with them. And then all sorts of ideas around, what if we printed the art out and had physical, what if I made like a swag store where people could order postcards of the, like, I don't know. It was kind of, or put up posters on like, WordCamp US or WordCamp Europe of some of the art. There's a lot of ideas I have spinning there, or like maybe each WordPress release, like with 6.0, maybe we'll do another series of pieces of art with some of the tooling that's coming out there. But it's just a side project. So I think I didn't expect it, quite honestly, to get as much fanfare as it did. I think it landed quite well with the community and people got it. And I hope it was kind of just like a gift back to the community during a time where it's really hard to find inspiration and to, I don't know, just to have something beautiful. I think there's something really wonderful about beauty and people coming together. And that truly is what made me so excited about the project, was those two things.
Yeah,
I could talk about this for forever, as you can tell.
I can tell. Yeah, some of the art is just like amazing, inspirational, and that's how you get inspiration. You look at what other people have done. Like one of my favorite pieces is the Mario block in the middle of it.
Yes,
On
yeah,
the
Nick
site.
Hansey.
Yeah, I'm an old time Mario fan, video game fan, back to the days of Donkey Kong where he first appeared. So I love that piece.
Amazing.
And yeah, I think
So creative too.
you've done a really good job. Now, are you going to be taking submissions, or have you decided where you're moving forward with this?
Yeah, so right now I basically check social media for people using the WP block art hashtag, and then I contact people, or I try to contact them. I'm not on Twitter, so sometimes I have to go do some roundabout ways of trying to track people down. But I just reach out and say, hey, I noticed you made some block art. I'd love to have you contribute on the site. There's 3 different people right now who I'm like lightly in the process of getting them to add some art to the site. But of course, they're also doing it on the side. But I actually am thinking about just spinning up a submission form that could be very simple. It could basically just be a contact form where I then just kind of go back and forth with making sure they have the requirements in place. Because I do think it would be neat and pretty low effort, since WordPress is so easy to use, to just, add content to the site and add new art to the site. There is a sense of like, do we need someone curating this? And I don't have time to bring together a team around this. Like, this truly is, a side project, and I'd rather community resources go to curating the pattern directory, for example, or the WordPress photo directory.
Yep.
But yeah, we'll see. There's a couple that were added after it launched. So that was kind of cool. So stay tuned there. I'm toying with the idea.
I really appreciate you doing it, and it's great for the community, and it's such a pleasure to look at. So thanks for taking that on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're headed to 6.0, which is going to be a major release. We just had a sub-release of 5.9.3, which, interesting enough, was more a bug fix release. I don't believe there was any security in 5.9.3 for a change, which is a good thing, probably. First question is, do you think we're going to see another 5.9.4 release before 6.0 comes? And are we on schedule for 6.0?
Great questions. 5.9.4 is not planned as of now. So I think that was brought up a week ago in a core meeting. And from what I remember, it basically was like 0 plans for 5.9.4. Of course, if things come up, that might happen. But right now, it's not in the works. And we are on track for 6.0. So I am one of the co-release coordinators. So that's another thing that keeps me up at night, is making sure 6.0 is on time with my co-release coordinator, Hector. We talk basically every day, checking in and making sure things are moving. And things look great right now. I don't anticipate any delays. I know 5.9, that was a big decision to delay. I do not think that's going to happen. I think the features that are coming, rather than being new and potentially disruptive, they are new, but they're not brand new. It's more building on the foundation that 5.9 set. So I think in many ways, it's more bells and whistles. It's improvements to the writing flow. It's improvements to tools like list view. It should be a really nice, easier release to adapt to. And more goodies rather than, oh my gosh, what is coming? I think 5.9 was you have to get ready and get prepared. I think 6.0 will be kind of like a pleasant smile for people, hopefully.
I'm actually really excited. It's such a fun time to be in WordPress with all these changes. Now, there's a lot of people that are still in the we don't like FSC, we don't like blocks. And you and I were chatting before. As you know, I've moved my whole site from a page builder to blocks. I am out of the page builder ecosystem. Even for clients, I'm out right now. So,
wow.
And it was interesting enough, I did a poll in the LinkedIn group I co-manage, and one of the things around FSC was people wanted to learn more about FSC. So I don't think the community is as against FSC or full-site editing as a lot of people think. I just think the people that are against full-site editing are very vocal.
I think that's true. And I also, here's one of the things that gets me is it's like, I I think sometimes people expect me to get upset or defensive when someone's not for FSC. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's fine. It's not going to make sense for people right now. Like it's not going to make sense for everyone. Like eventually in time it might, but you might be waiting for a certain feature. Like 6.0 is going to have block locking in the editing interface. So you can actually lock, say, don't move this block, don't edit this block, remove access from that. But you know what? It's not tied to user roles. So you can't necessarily control that from the interface. So say only admins can do locking. You have to do it programmatically. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's something you're waiting for, right? Like I think even like responsiveness, that was a big thing that was originally saved for 6.0 was to add in more intrinsic web design principles and add in more responsive controls. And that didn't happen as much as we wanted. And so some people might be waiting for those things. And to me, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And also please tell us what you're waiting for. What will make full-site editing useful for you? Because that's where we need to know and that's where we need to go. And so it's like, and I'd love to talk. I love talking to people. There was someone recently in the community who I saw like a nice long Twitter thread just ripping apart FSC. And I was like, this is this is gold. To me, when people share like that, I see it as criticizing because they care and because they want to use it. And the fact that someone takes the time to, we have so many things that we could be doing otherwise. Yeah. That takes the time to go explore and then report back and say, here are all the things that are stopping me from using it. I wish more people did that because that is ultimately the best thing the community can do right now is say, I'm really waiting on this feature and making sure it's logged in GitHub, making sure there are very specific use cases that the folks building these features can think about. All of that goes such a long way to keeping the WordPress community vital and relevant. Because, we were talking about earlier, 43% of the internet, like that is a huge burden. And the only way we continue to meet all those needs is if we continue to have pathways for people to feel heard. And, whatever I can do, I'm at Anne Zazu on WordPress.org Slack. I have a site, nomad.blog, like I have a contact form there, like, please, like I want to hear from folks and make sure there are pathways being created. Because we do need everyone's help to kind of get where we need to go. But it's not going to, for some people, it's easy. It makes perfect sense. There's a person on WordPress.com actually who found my YouTube videos and contacted me and is using full-site editing on WordPress.com. And he absolutely loves it. Like he'll just send me messages from time to time talking about like, look at this cool thing I did. I made a new template and I did this and this is so cool. And, and then other people are like, I don't think I'll ever use this. And it's, there's a huge spectrum of needs in the WordPress space and the task is to accommodate all of them.
Yeah. And one of the things you said was, please open a ticket. And I gotta bring this up because, I sit with a number of developer advocates. So I have a weekly conversation with Courtney Robertson, and we talk about that quite a bit. Can we just get people to open tickets? I've had this conversation with both Brian Gardner, Nick Diego over at WP Engine. They say the same thing. Nick, he's going to hate me. He's gone so far as to say, if somebody doesn't know how to open a ticket, contact him. So, Nick, that's on you, my friend. and you've basically said the same thing. And I know Birgit Polyhack has said the same thing. So like, guys, if you're having problems out there, open a ticket, please. And if you don't know how, reach out to one of these people. They'll help you. Let's just help each other, because if we don't get these problems logged and these concerns logged, we don't move forward.
Yeah. And I think especially without meetups where we're not able to meet in person, there's a huge amount of insight that's lost that part of doing the hallway hangouts and part of trying to be so approachable and, trying to do these YouTube videos is because I recognize that we don't have that time where we can just like chit chat in the hallway, and when you find and you hear about these use cases, like I remember going to WordCamps and my phone would be filled with notes. Like as people were talking to me, I'd say like, hey, can I take notes of what you're talking about so I can make sure to follow up? Because my brain cannot remember everything. And the amount of just rich insights and feedback that I feel like we got at WordCamps. I'm keen to get back and to find ways to continue. So I know it might feel like we're so disconnected, or maybe you've never talked to me and it'd be weird to ping me. Like, it's not weird. Please ping me. I think I know Nick is the same way and Brian's the same way, Birgit is the same way. We all very much want to help, and we also get it. We all were, outsiders of the WordPress community at some point and had to make our way in. And now we have the honor to help others find their way in and to give feedback. And I think one of the things I hear from folks a lot is, oh, well, I figured this was already found, or I figured this was obvious. And sometimes it's not. There was a bug just a couple weeks ago that someone almost didn't report. Like, he straight up told me, he's like, oh, I almost didn't report this because I figured this was either intentional or was known. And if he hadn't reported it, it would be a pretty gnarly bug. And luckily it's already fixed, but it's one of those things where it all helps for people to speak up and to find things. So, and while we're talking about this, I do want to encourage people to help test 6.0 since beta 1 is out. So if you are someone who's comfortable reporting things and this doesn't speak to you, I also encourage you to use that superpower of comfort to help test 6.0 early, because we need it. And there's a lot of cool things coming.
I actually have beta 1 running on a dev site that's an exact copy of my production site right now. So
I love it. And
that's the way I test. And, I'm just, there's no point in testing with what I consider test code. I don't think you see all the scenarios. And I'm going to see some interesting stuff because in my ecosystem, I'm also all in with cadence and cadence blocks. So that's my theme of choice. So I'm going to know pretty quick if I start breaking stuff. And it seems pretty stable, but I'm not finished looking through it. But that's how you learn. And then when we get to the release candidate stages, I suspect there'll probably be, and you probably don't know, there'll probably be 3 or 4 betas, I would think. And then we'll go to 3 or 4 release candidates, and then we'll go to a release party. And for those who don't know, the release party is what goes on Slack. Today the release comes out. And if you've never watched one, even if you don't want to say a word, I suggest you get there and watch one on release date, because they're quite interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I find it to be really fun. I've thought about recording myself talking through a release party. I just did my very first one for the beta 1 yesterday. And I was like, I feel like demystifying this would be kind of cool, even if it's just almost like documentation, because I had no idea how this was done. And I had to have Tonya, who was the release coordinator for 5.9, was very kind to help train up myself and Hector. It's magical. Like, it was actually, I actually had a lot of fun. I was very nervous, but yeah, there's something at the very beginning of the release party. I asked folks to, if you're game, react to this message with like the flag where you're coming from, you're typing in from. And it was so neat to see people from all over the world who were there and present to help test and to celebrate, these different milestones. So it's very special.
Yeah, I know when 5.9 came out, I was in a release party and testing upgrades and packages, and that stuff's really important because people say, well, that should have all been done. And I've seen slips in software packages on go live date. I've seen this happen. And that's what we're trying to avoid is let's not put a package out that's going to cause our user base incredible amounts of frustration. It's just not worth it. So.
Yeah.
So that's that. Moving forward, is there a feature in 6.0 that you're really excited about, Anne? That you really stands out and kind of, what's that?
Oh man. I mean, I will say what feature I'm most looking forward to, but it's going to sound minor compared to what's actually coming. One of the features that I know Justin Tadlock on WP Tavern is also stoked about this. You can basically use a cover block and set it to use your featured image of a post. So if you're creating a template, and let's say you have a template for, the single post view, which you can do with full site editing. All of this is done with block themes and full site editing. You can basically add a cover block and say, okay, cover block, please use my featured image. And then you can, put inside the cover block your post title. So you can have your post title on the backdrop of your featured image. And then you could even add, a duotone filter to the featured image, or you can change the dimensions of the featured image however you want. And I'm using a block theme right now on my personal site, and I have been waiting for this feature. And it just allows you to do some cool layouts and to take advantage of the cover block. But for whatever reason, that one's just really singing to me right now. I'm very excited about it. Otherwise, oh man, there's so many different ones, but I think the top one that I think will really unlock some cool stuff has to be the style switching and having style variations. It really kind of steps us forward. And to kind of take a step back though, the style system is basically a part of full sighting, a big part of full sighting that unifies the different, if you have core styles that set certain colors and what have you, then you have theme styles, and you have user set styles. It kind of unifies and controls and manages all of those for you, and also allows you to tweak things. So with full sighting, you can use the styles interface to change things like the background color, the link color, set up the block, the button block exactly how you want, including any individual block. You can set up exactly as you want, and it impacts everything across the site. So it's really a neat, powerful feature. And what these style variations and style switching does is allows you to use style variations and presets given to you by the theme author that they have packaged to make look really good with the theme and with the patterns that they have, to just easily switch between them. So you can have as many as you'd like. Let's say there's 3 or 4. You can switch between the different ones, and it'll impact your whole site. So you can basically have, as many different theme options as you want within one theme. And there's a pro theme from Anna in the community. I think it's the Blocksy Premium block theme that's pitched that way, using style variations. And Rich Tabor also has a theme that uses style variations. And I expect to see this more and more. But it basically just unlocks creative potential very rapidly. So rather than having to tweak things and, customize the block theme to your liking, you can just switch through very different look and feels of your site very easily. And it also sets the groundwork for things like a randomizer. So let's say you have style variations given to you by a block theme author that you can switch between. But then let's say also you just want to see what it would look like to use some random different colors that are intelligently given. So like we know that these color palettes look good together, and you can just switch through them. And then when you combine that with the Web Fonts API to allow you to have different font faces load, it becomes pretty magical. And I'm really excited about it because I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like, I'm over this. I want to switch up my website, but I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. This would be a super easy way to do that, to just completely switch things on the fly, without needing to switch themes, without needing to dig into any code or any CSS. And it'll update everywhere pretty quickly. So I'm super excited about that feature. I think it's a big key one, especially for those who are using full site editing. But there's a ton of stuff for those who are not as well. I know the multi-select across, basically if you can select text across blocks, that's a huge feature that's been worked on. That impacts the whole writing experience, rather than like if you're trying to drag your cursor and select text across multiple blocks, rather than it just selecting all of them, you can actually like pinpoint exactly what you want it to select, cut, copy, paste, delete, whatever you want to do, which is super exciting and actually strangely hard to do programmatically. So that's also coming to 6.0. So there's some little things there to talk about, but also some big features.
It's funny, you look at the features. One of the things I'm looking forward to, and you've already touched on, is block locking. I want that yesterday. Yeah. And I think where that's going to extend in a future release is to user roles. I really think it will. So that's one of the features I like. And the other thing I'm really excited about, which isn't so much in the release, but something that Automattic's been working on, is the pattern directory. I think people do not understand the power of block patterns. I've used them on my sites. I've used them. I have a Linktree type site that I built with Frost, which is Brian Gardner's team that WP Engine owns. Yeah. And he's given you the pattern to build a Linktree. And by the way, thanks, Brian, for the content upgrade idea for clients. It's wonderful. I've actually content upgraded a couple of clients and said, why are you paying Linktree X dollars a month? I can build it for you for X dollars and be done with it. And Brian's actually in Frost giving you the pattern to do a Linktree type site. You don't have to do anything. You drop the pattern, you change the icons, you're done. And that's the power of patterns. Like, one of the things that I use all the time is reusable blocks. On my site, I've got a podcast share, subscribe to buttons, and I've used that as a reusable block on all my posts because it just...
You should, since you like block locking, you should check it out because for 6.0, test this sometime this week. For 6.0, they're actually adding block locking to reusable blocks as an example of actually applying that principle, because one of the big pieces of feedback I think it started with 5.7, WordPress 5.7, where it changed some of the flow for reusable blocks. People were accidentally editing the reusable block directly rather than converting blocks and then editing it. So now there's some neat functionality there. Yeah. Oh yeah. I think a lot of people started to, and this is where block locking can be applied within the system itself, which is really cool. And I totally patterns. You're so right to call that out. And with this release, people will see patterns integrated in more places. So right when you need it, you'll see it. So let's say you're creating a new template and you're at the root level of the template. When you use the quick inserter, it'll prioritize patterns so that it'll be easier for them to find. Because I don't know about you, sometimes I'm building a new site and I forget patterns exist. And it's like, oh my gosh, I should have been using patterns this whole time. And that's one of the things that we're trying to solve for, is to actually, especially to take advantage of the ease that patterns allow, where you don't have to worry about layout or getting a container block right or anything like that. You can have beautiful designs very quickly. And so I definitely expect patterns to continue to play a huge role going forward. And the pattern directory is open for submission. So if you create something that you really like and want to share it with the community, you can actually add it to the pattern directory, which is very, very exciting.
Yeah. And the other thing I think we're going to see coming down the road is some more connection between the media library and Openverse. And in terms of photos, I think that's coming. I think it's really important. And if you got photos you want to share, like please share them with the community. I think it's really important. I've got some I need to get around to this weekend or next weekend actually submitting. So I've got a few I'm going to submit, and I would encourage anybody else to get involved in that project as well, because has there been any discussion, and the media, I have to come back to the media library. It seems to be, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to be the most neglected part of the whole WordPress ecosystem, in my opinion. Has there been any?
I would probably agree with you. There's been a lot of discussion around it. I actually, with the outreach program, ran, we have calls for testing, and then we have what I call like explorations. So it's very less practical in terms of like, this is a feature actively in development, and more future thinking. So more long-term. It's like, let's go explore this, pave a pathway for those who are eventually going to go build something around this. Let's go explore it early. And so the reason I say that is because it was around actually Openverse, and just, I called it like all things media. So everything from, Openverse to where do you go get photos? How do you do, what's the word? When you have to, why can't I think of the word, where you're saying this is who did the photo, like you're giving credit. I can't remember the name for the exact terminology for that, but attribution. There we go. This is my pandemic brain.
That's okay.
Yeah, attribution. So it's like, how do you properly show attributions? How do you actually want to organize your photos? How do you want to see Openverse photos come there? And what was one of the biggest things was the media library, just in general. How do we improve, searching? How do we have folders? How do we intelligently show things from Openverse? How do we encourage good accessibility practices with the content that you have? There's a ton of stuff there. And I'm very excited that, in my mind, I think Openverse can be a vehicle for re-examining the media library and kind of reimagining some aspects of it, since it does provide so much free content for folks to use.
And maybe it will get people excited about the media library. I think part of the problem is, truthfully, I don't think the media library in an open source world is a sexy project per se. It's
right.
And I think if we add something like Openverse to it, then people will get excited about it. I think that's part of the big issue there, personally.
Yeah. I also think patterns will help with this. So, having things where it's easy to switch out media. I think all of these things kind of work together, but you're right. There is like a baseline foundational element of the actual media library experience that I definitely think needs to be improved. And that we're, as we talked about earlier with different platforms, we're used to being on Facebook or Google Drive or wherever, where it's much easier to manage media.
Yeah, so true. I have to throw this one out there because I got it in a discussion the other day, and somebody said to me, why would they do a website in WordPress? Because there's always plugin vulnerabilities. And I spend a lot of the time in my business in that space, updating sites for clients that they don't want to do the back end work themselves. Some of them probably haven't logged in their website in 2 years, that problem. And how would you answer that criticism? And
I would say one of the things that I think is, I actually talked to a friend about this recently. And I'm going to veer off, and I promise I'll bring it back. Imagine you're trying to find a restaurant. You're in a city. You know pretty well how to look at reviews, how to look on Google Maps and be like, this place has 2-star reviews, or I don't know, it looks like it might be shut down. It might be closed, or I can't even find them on Google, or I can't even find any reviews for them. We all have built within us at this point some level of literacy in terms of looking at review systems and understanding some good best practices around things that we might purchase or go experience food wise, or even, going to a concert. There's so many different things that we can use if you apply the same knowledge to adding a plugin. So looking at when it was last updated, looking at how many reviews it has, looking at the scale, how many sites is it used on, looking at who it's done by and seeing if you use another plugin by them. There's kind of some basics that once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to make good decisions and to actually, not install something that might be a vulnerability to your site. And I also, of course, encourage having backups and having security scanning when you need it. But I also will say, just for folks in general, why would I create a WordPress site? I think this is where there's the trade-off of you can see every line of code, and with many eyes, there are shallow bugs and quick fixes. And I think that's, in my mind, I would much rather deal with a potential security vulnerability than be shut down forever. It's fixable. Let's put it that way. It's a fixable problem.
Yep.
Whereas on other platforms, it's not always fixable. I just was talking to a friend of mine's dad this past weekend, and his Facebook account got hacked, and they are so difficult to get anything back from. And he cannot get he's sent in his driver's license. He's done everything. And he's completely lost all of his photos, including some photos that he purposely uploaded to Facebook because he threw them away. They were prints of things, and he can't get access to them. They're gone. And I'm trying to, I just found this out. So I'm going to try and do what I can to help. I don't know if there's anything I can do, but it makes me really sad because, you can always restore a hacked site, but a lot of these locked in systems, you might never get your content back.
So, I agree with you. And, even in the Microsoft world, it's funny. A lot of people in business use Windows as an operating system, and they patch vulnerabilities every week, every month. And we just got to accept that. Where I get concerned is when developer A ignores the security vulnerability and doesn't do anything. Then my red flag antenna goes up. And there's other ways to learn too. I mean, there's a number of players in the WordPress space like Patch, WP Scan, which Automattic owns, and so on. And iThemes, you can read their blogs and you can read what's going on in this space. And frankly, if you don't want to do it, the best advice I
don't have to
is get somebody to do it for you, because you got to do it. And I'm not the biggest fan of turning automatic updates on because I've seen plugin conflicts cause grief. So I don't necessarily like that approach personally.
I was about to say automatic updates can be good. I do it for some, but actually one of the things, I'm very minimalistic. So one of the things I often encourage folks to do is set up your site and then add a calendar reminder 6 months from now, maybe 3 months from now, whatever time frame feels good to you, that asks you very specific questions. And it might be as simple as, have you gotten specific feedback about your site that you need to update? But one of the things I often encourage people to do is to say, are there any plugins or themes that I am not using that I can get rid of off my site?
Yep.
And to just have an immediate check-in, because it's pretty quick. You know what you're not going to use. And it's just like anything else. I mean, this is, again, I'm very minimalistic. So it's very easy for me to be like, I've read this book. I need to get rid of it. Or I'm not wearing these shoes anymore. I'm going to donate them. Do that with your site. Do a little bit of just cleanup, kind of like you would around the house, spring cleanup. Do the same thing with your website. And that's one of the best things you can do to keep your site secure is just get rid of unused code or unused things that you're not needing on your site.
And I looked at a site last week for a client that was running slow. nowhere to rely. There was 77 plugins installed in the dashboard.
Oh,
And there was only 9 of them that were actively being used.
Wow.
And what people don't understand is that's just code. So even though you're not using them, code is a potential for an issue, a conflict, a vulnerability, speed issues, calls. I mean, it just goes on. And I looked at this one and said, really? Now, needless to say, that site is now running 10 plugins.
Yeah. And this is where there's some level of education that needs to happen, right? So it's funny because I totally, this is where it's like I want to spend 5 minutes with people and just give them like the highlights of stuff. And this is where we're so lucky to be in a community with so many folks who take the time to educate people and to train people. It's a real thing that we have to kind of encourage best practices around.
The other two things I'd throw out there, just because we're talking about it, one, and I almost wonder if it should be baked in the core, is two-factor authentication. I almost think it's time to bake that option in the core, not make it mandatory and just say, here it is. That's my opinion. And then the other is, if it were me, besides that, is just to kind of keep teaching people. I think I agree with you. I think we got to keep helping people and saying, here it is, and this is what you do. And just be careful. Like, don't rely on your web host for backups, because I know of at least 3 major hosts in the last 5 years that have had backup servers hacked as well. So be careful. Yeah. Remember, this is your business. Treat it like a business. Don't get into that road. Yeah.
There was a push, I think, in like many years ago, like over the last, I think there was a two-factor plugin that was a feature project, meaning like sometimes feature projects are things alongside the core software that are being experimented with. So it's like, can this make it into core? Let's make it a feature project. And oftentimes it's a plugin, like there's a performance plugin right now. And there was a two-factor plugin, but I'm not sure what happened with it. I'll have to do some like research to follow up on it, but this is something that has come up around like, should this go in core? And if so, what would it look like? And I agree. This is where having like really good defaults and encouraging good user behavior and having, these things set up and baked in, I think could be really interesting to explore.
Yeah. And I know there's countless security plugins that add 2FA or two factors, like iThemes does, WordFence does. I think PatchStack does. They all do pretty well. It's pretty well a given at this point in time. So there are ways to get around that, but I think that's one of the biggest things. And by the way, just to mention, if you're doing two-factor, don't do texting. Please get an app for your phone. Use an authenticator app. I use a YubiKey on purpose. And if you're going to get a YubiKey or an external device, get 2 or 3 of them. Like they get lost. We've all been there.
We've all been there. Yeah.
it's just frustration. So I'm, stuff like that. Where do you see WordPress going after 6.0? And since we're talking about that, what I think of it, what about the beta label discussion on FSE?
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Full site editing is still marked in beta. I tend to agree with it personally. I think it should be in beta. I know there's been all kinds of discussion on the Tavern, on numerous podcasts, all over the place. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so it's funny because I actually opened the issue because I was getting asked it. People were like, Anne, when is the beta label being moved? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. Like, let me open up an issue because this would be really good to track. And it got some traction because I think for whatever reason, I listed as like a discussion for 6.0, just like, hey, we should talk about this. And I think people thought I was saying, no, this should happen for 6.0. And so I clarified on the thread, but some really good discussion happened as a result of it that I'm quite happy ended up happening. Like sometimes it's strange to me what gets traction and what doesn't. Sometimes I'm like begging for people to engage with something. And then other times things I would never expect suddenly get, a lot of dialogue. And essentially right now, in terms of the beta label, it's not ready. Like I think I think someone said it really well. It might've been Nick Diego. Like there's no harm, or maybe George from GoDaddy, it's like there's no harm in keeping it on there right now. And I think there needs to be, quite frankly, if 6.0 had included some of the more features that were planned for the roadmap, and this ties into like what's going to come for the future, I think we could be further along there. But I think there are just some things that didn't make it in. And a big piece of it is the information architecture and the connection points between full site editing and the post editor and the template editor. Like there's a lot there that still needs to be refined from a purely, how do we make it more intuitive? How do we make sure it makes sense when you're editing something that's global versus something that's maybe just in a post? There are some key things from a design perspective that need to be resolved. That is all in progress. But until I think that those things in particular are addressed, I think it makes sense to keep the beta label on there. And I think no matter what, when the beta label is removed, it's going to be intense and possibly controversial. But I hope there's some really good feedback that comes from it and that we can continue to have a discussion about it. And I think there are always going to be some people who are going to want to hold off and be very conservative. There's always going to be some people who want to be cutting edge. I quite honestly fall kind of more to the conservative side. So I'm kind of in the middle, but leaning towards the conservative of like, let's keep it. So I imagine that, I don't know if it'll happen for 6.0, but what I imagine to happen is that each release, it will be evaluated. No, so we'll have moments, we'll check against the things and then kind of make a decision.
I think that's the right approach. And honestly, if anybody remembers this product called Gmail, Google had Gmail in beta for over 3 years. So, I mean, I wouldn't be concerned about that. The other thing we have to remember is in software, and, you know, there's a lot of screaming all the time because people don't understand how software is developed. And they say, well, why is there an issue? And I always say, if you waited for software to be 100%, you'd never release anything.
Yeah, you would sit on it forever, and you'd probably build the wrong thing because you wouldn't get feedback.
Yeah,
like honestly, that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in being so involved in, you know, these WordPress releases is it is crucial to get feedback early and often.
No, it's true. And that shows you're listening and engaging with the community, which is something we've talked about a couple of times in this podcast and sort of said, you know, we got to keep that going. And that's what makes our community special. So I think we just got to keep at it kind of thing. So.
Do you mind if I touch a bit more on just what's coming after 6.0?
Sure, I'd love you to. Go on.
Okay, great. I was like, I feel like I blew by that by accident because I was so caught on the beta thing. Yeah, it's interesting because I would encourage people to find, there's a post called the preliminary roadmap for 6.0 from Matthias, and I think what is listed there is also going to apply for 6.1 and probably 6.2. It's very detailed on there. And I'll just call out some areas that I will say I think will constantly be under active iteration. And to me, my brain works this way, I have to write it down. But I wrote down a couple of things where it's like the style engine. So a bunch of stuff with styles, kind of like we were talking about earlier with like the randomizer. And also for block theme authors, I think more and more there's going to be things built into a new mechanism called theme JSON to allow you to create more with less CSS and less reliance on CSS. So I continue to see that being a trend. I think a lot of the information architecture that I mentioned, kind of reconfiguring things, making sure there's a very strong sense of what's global versus what's local, as well as just having very solid entry points into different things. So let's say you have a classic theme, but you want the classic theme to be able to edit the headers and footers. So we have a template part focus mode. What could that look like? How could we open up that pathway as a way to gradually adopt things? So rather than editing the whole template, you're just editing pieces of it. I also think patterns are going to continue to be a huge thing, especially like integrated into the experience. So one of the things coming to 6.0 that's under consideration and is in beta is like when you're creating a new page, a patterns modal will pop up that pulls in patterns from the theme so that you can select a pattern to make it easier to start creating a page. Like, what does that look like for template creation? So you're creating a new template. What if that's the same flow? As we talked about earlier too, I think block locking is going to continue to be a huge thing, along with expanding responsive controls. That's a big one I keep hearing from folks is responsiveness. I had a very wonderful email exchange with someone after I did a recent call for questions, and he wasn't happy with my answer that I posted, and gave me feedback on it and gave me the chance to kind of provide more information. And
Wow.
I do want to make it clear to folks, like responsiveness is a huge thing. There is just only so much time in the day.
Yeah.
And there's a huge maintenance load once we implement something. So there are numerous issues there that I could link to, but responsiveness is a big one. And it's something that's being moved a bit slowly, intentionally, because it's very, very convoluted and it needs to be done intelligently. Also tied to this, just design tools in general. So adding more supports to more blocks, and making them a bit more intuitive. So 6.0 actually has a new color panel that takes up less space. That's
cool.
a bit easier to use. There's also a new border control panel that's also easier to use and a bit clearer. So there's some upgrades. It's interesting. We're like adding functionality, and then also from a design perspective, it's like, okay, we add this functionality. How do we make it even easier to use and more understandable? And I think we'll continue to see that happen as more things are added. I'll also finally note the navigation block. I think Justin Tadlock said this in a post recently. He was like, it's the most frustrating thing for me to use.
I agree with him.
Yes. Yeah. I would love to hear what you find frustrating, because that's also a huge area that needs to be iterated on. So like, how do you manage the different menus? How do we create mega menus? How do we add more supports for it? How do we help theme JSON and control what's in there? There's so many things to figure out. How can we allow customization of the mobile icon? Can you add your own? I just got feedback the other day where someone was like, I want to have two different menus in the header, but on mobile, I want it to collapse into one. Yep. And I'm in the process right now of finding if there's an issue open for that. So this is like one of the items on my to-do list today, for example. So there's so much there. And I'm curious to know, like, what about the navigation block is so frustrating?
I just over the years, recently, I just find it so hard to maneuver around. The more I play with it, and having done this a long time, I just don't find it as intuitive as it should be. It's just an overall comment, and I just know every time I start playing with it, I say, do I need to do this? Can I avoid doing this? And that's really, my biggest frustration with blocks. I don't have many frustrations with blocks, but that one, it just kills me. Every time I have to touch a navigation block, I say, do I have 2 hours? Like,
that is really good feedback.
And
it's something I'm thinking a lot about.
My pleasure. I have to ask the question, because there's been controversy over this one too. Multi-site. Let's go there. Is multi-site dying? Is it past its time? Do we even want to go there anymore? Or what's your thought on that?
That's such a good... I know Post Status did a deep dive into multi-site. And what's funny is I actually started out on WordPress on a multi-site. Like, I thought WordPress was multi-site. I did not understand. Like, when I joined Automattic, I was like, oh, WordPress.com is like web.unc.edu, which is what the multi-site that I worked on. I didn't understand the concept of it, because to me, that was all WordPress was this like, larger infrastructure. I don't know. I think there are some very legitimate use cases. I've seen a lot around translations. Yes. So having different multi-sites for translations. And I think that's a huge thing. And obviously that's part of the roadmap for WordPress, is eventually helping with different languages and having translations more intuitively in place. So I'm curious to see when that happens, what happens with multi-site. I also have had I have some friends who've created a multi-site. She runs like a magazine. And so she wants different multi-sites in place for different cities, basically. So that she can have kind of lockdown controls and can add people just to one specific, like Los Angeles or whatever, where it's like they don't have access to the full site. So to me, I think multi-site makes a lot of sense if you're deeply concerned about things like permissions, or if you're a university and you want, students to have sites and you want control over the architecture. I think there's actually a lot of validity there still. I am very biased because I came from that background. So to me, I see lots of use cases for it. I also at the same time have dissuaded people from doing it. One of my friends called me up and wanted to kind of do a similar setup as like different cities or whatever. And I started asking her some questions about how much effort she wanted to put into basically having production versus development environments, and actually talking to her about like, what are your needs with permissions? Because you probably can just use a plugin if you need more granular control and you're worried about that. Like, how many people are you really adding onto the site? Because you can always, if you need to, you can always move into a multi-site direction. But once you're multi-site, it's really hard to go back on. And then a nerdy point that I always like to mention is backups are really complicated, and restoring is really complicated with multi-site. I know this from experience. I worked on WordPress for many years, and that was one of the biggest, hurdles we had was around multi-site. And eventually, if I remember correctly, we actually stopped supporting multi-site because it was like, this is a mess. It's very hard to restore. It's easy to back up, but to actually restore a multi-site network is very, very difficult. And I don't think people think about kind of those nerdier aspects of the management of it. So I don't know. I kind of go back and forth. There have been times where I've talked people into it, and there are times when I've talked people out of it. As always with WordPress, I love optionality. And so I think we'll continue to see it because it is all about optionality. And I think there's still some cool use cases, particularly in like higher ed environments or in situations where you might want to have, translations or a very specific niche. I think that It Gets Better project uses a multi-site to set up their different country locales. So I think that's like also a good use case.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I know for myself, every time I look at it for a client, I talk the client and myself out of it very quickly. Mm-hmm. And part of it is the management side, the backup side. Yeah. What happens if you have to restore one portion of the multi-site and not the whole thing? It just gets, it gets ugly. Messy. Yeah. and it doesn't matter whether you're using a cPanel based backup or you're using a backup tool like Updraft or Backup Buddy, two prominent tools, it's the same mess all over the time. And that's kind of why I try to avoid it. Now, some people like it because then they don't have to spin up 5 sites. I'd rather spin up 5 sites, just personally.
Personally, I'm probably the same.
Yeah, that's the big. Is there anything else that we should touch on that with 6.0 or anything else going on at Automattic that we should touch on that we haven't?
Man, I don't know. I don't think so right now. I think if anything, I'll just note that there are a lot of writing improvements coming to 6.0 that I'm really excited about. And I think folks, one of the things with 5.9 that we had to kind of like walk a line with is like promoting full siting stuff while also making sure it's clear that it's beta. I think we kind of did an okay job. I think, it's difficult. It's really hard to explain to folks like this is new and this is, but also still early. So don't expect the world, but like help us get it there. I think 6.0 has something for everyone. And so I think 5.9 somewhat full siting overshadowed some of the stuff that did impact everyone. I think 6.0 is a really balanced release. If you're using the cutting edge stuff, there is stuff for you there. If you are using the tried and true usual WordPress experience, there is stuff for you. So I think that's the main message that I'd love to get across because it is very much, there's something for everyone in this release for sure. And I don't want folks thinking that, if I don't adopt this new thing, I'm not going to get some goodies. I think that there is very much in this release something that folks will be excited by.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think it's really an exciting time to be, probably the most exciting time in the last 10 years to be in WordPress, really, with what's going on and what Automattic's doing and the feedback from the community. There's a lot of pluses going on. If somebody wants to reach out to you with a question and an issue with submitting a ticket, I'll throw that in, or anything else going on, how's the best way?
On WordPress server Slack, I'm at Anne Zazu, so Zazu, and my name is Anne. There's always that E in there. You can also find me always hang out in the FSE Outreach Experiment channel. If you post anything in there, you'll probably hear from me. Or honestly, the community there's also really cool. People always like some of those messages will come in and people will chime in before I see it. And then I also have a site, nomad.blog, and there's a contact form there. I don't recommend people follow that blog because I've had some WordPress people follow me there, and I'm like, I ramble about my whole life on there. So if you want to hear random things about like travels or friends or books I've read, sure. But it's definitely not like a WordPress resource site. From time to time, I'll post stuff about WordPress, but the easiest way is just the contact form. And then if you want to comment, I love when people ask things publicly because other folks are likely thinking the same thing. So if you're comfortable with that, I really do encourage folks to ask in like the FSE outreach experiment, or there's like a YouTube channel that you can find of mine and asking in the comments below, because I think it helps everyone learn. So yeah, please reach out if you want to talk about all things WordPress, or, really anything. If you just are curious about full siting, don't know where to start, I'm happy to kind of share some resources and invite you along for the journey.
Yeah. Thanks, Anne, for your time today. Have an amazing day.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
You're welcome. My pleasure. This episode of the SDM Show was sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. A very special thank you to Anne McCarthy for joining me on today's edition of the SDM Show. Thank you for listening to this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing. For more information about Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info. From here, you can connect to us on social media, go to our website, and even go to the podcast to subscribe. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Make your business succeed.